On a warm summer night in 1912, 8 people went to sleep inside a small farmhouse in Villisca, Iowa. By morning, every one of them was dead. A father, a mother, 4 children, and 2 young girls who had only come to spend the night. No gunshots, no fire, no warning, just an axe. And what happened inside that house was so brutal, so silent, and so personal that more than a century later, it still feels unreal. Because this was not a fast killing. It was not chaos. It was a slow, terrifying massacre carried out in the dark while an entire family slept only feet apart from one another. This is the story of the Villisca Axe Murders. Villisca was the kind of place where people believed they were safe. A quiet Iowa town, small streets. Church gatherings, farming families, doors that were often left unlocked. People who knew each other by name. A place where terrible things simply did not happen. Which is exactly why this crime tore through the town like a curse. The Moore family was well known and respected. Josiah Moore was a businessman. His wife Sarah was active in the community. Their children were Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul. On the evening of June 9, 1912, the family attended a church program. 2 sisters, Ina May and Lena Stillinger, came home with them afterward and stayed the night. It should have been a normal Sunday evening. It should have ended with everyone asleep and safe. Instead, it ended with one of the most horrifying murder scenes in American history. Somewhere after midnight, someone entered the Moore house. How they got inside has never been fully proven. Some believe the killer was already hiding in the house before the family returned. Others believe he came in later, moving quietly through the darkness. Either way, he brought an axe. And not just any axe. Investigators believed it was Josiah Moore's own. That detail makes the whole thing even worse. The family had brought their ordinary lives home with them that night. Their own house, their own beds, their own property, and one of those ordinary tools became the weapon used to wipe them out. The attack appears to have started in the master bedroom. Josiah and Sarah Moore were sleeping when the first blows came down. The violence was overwhelming. This was not a single strike and death. This was repeated force. Heavy, crushing, deliberate force. Josiah suffered more blows than any other victim, and reports from the investigation described injuries so severe that his face was badly destroyed. The kind of damage that made the scene hard even for investigators to look at. Then the killer moved through the house, room by room, victim by victim. 4 children, 2 visiting sisters, all attacked while they slept, all helpless, all trapped in the same silent house. Imagine the feeling of that place in the dark. The killer moving carefully from bed to bed, wooden floors creaking underfoot, doors opening just enough, a raised axe coming down in the blackness, and no one strong enough to stop it. The youngest victims were children who should have been dreaming of the next day, not dying in their beds. That is what makes Villisca linger in the mind so long. Not just that people were killed, but that they were killed where they were supposed to be safest. In bed, asleep, inside their own home. And the brutality did not stop with the number of victims. Several of the bodies showed clear signs of extreme overkill. That means the attacker kept striking long after death was already certain. He did not stop when the victims were no longer moving. He kept going, and that is the part that tells you something darker than simple murder. It suggests rage, or obsession, or a mind that had detached itself completely from the human beings in front of it. Some victims were hit so many times that their faces were nearly unrecognizable. The wounds were concentrated on the head and upper body, where the force of the axe could do the most devastating damage. This was not a clean crime. It was savage. It was intimate. And it was done with enough force to leave investigators stunned. Then came the details that made the house feel even more haunted. The killer did not immediately flee. He stayed. Mirrors were covered. Windows were covered. The house seems to have been rearranged in small, eerie ways that suggest the killer wanted to control what could be seen and what could not. There were also signs that he may have eaten inside the house after the killings. Think about that for a second. 8 people dead, children dead, and the person responsible may have stayed long enough to eat. That detail turns the whole case from horrifying to almost impossible to comprehend, because it suggests calm, it suggests time. It suggests that after the violence, the killer remained inside the home as if nothing had happened. The next morning, neighbors noticed something was wrong. The Moore family had not come out. No chores, no movement, no children playing outside. One of the neighbors, Mary Peckham, became concerned and knocked at the door. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Then Ross Moore, Josiah's brother, came to the house and entered with a key. What he found inside was devastating. In the guest bedroom, he discovered the bodies of Ina May and Lena Stillinger. As the house was searched further, the full scale of the crime became clear. Every member of the Moore family was dead. The shock in Villisca spread instantly. People rushed to the house. The town was horrified. And in the chaos that followed, the crime scene was badly compromised. People entered the house before it was properly secured. Objects were moved. Rooms were disturbed. Evidence was lost. In today's world, that alone would be a major disaster for an investigation. In 1912, it was fatal to the case, because once that house had been disturbed, the trail began to disappear. Doctors believe the murders had taken place sometime between midnight and 5 a.m. That narrow window became one of the most important clues in the case. It suggested a killer who had time to move carefully, time to remain hidden, time to strike 8 times and still leave behind a house full of unanswered questions. Some reports say the murderer may have waited in the attic before the family slept. There were even accounts of 2 spent cigarettes found up there, which helped fuel the theory that someone had been hiding inside the house long before the killings. If that is true, then the killer did not simply break into the home, he waited in it. He listened to the family breathe, he stayed close enough to hear them settle into bed. That possibility makes the whole thing even darker. The idea that the house was occupied by a silent presence before anyone knew danger was there, and once the killings were over, the killer still had enough composure to cover the mirrors and windows, as if he were trying to trap the horror inside the walls with the bodies. The case became one of the most talked about crimes in the country. Not just because of how many people died, but because of how strangely the killer behaved. There was violence. Then there was stillness. Then there was the mystery of what kind of person could do such a thing and disappear. Over time, a few major suspects emerged. The first was Frank F. Jones, a wealthy businessman in town. Josiah Moore had worked for him, and there were rumors of tension between the two men. Some believed the murder may have grown out of a personal grudge, business resentment, or a deeper conflict hidden beneath the surface of town life. But rumor is not proof, and no hard evidence ever fully tied Jones to the murders. Another name that became infamous in the case was Reverend George Kelly. Kelly was a traveling preacher, and by many accounts, he behaved strangely around the time of the murders. He later confessed, and not in a vague or harmless way. His confession included disturbing details that made people wonder whether he truly knew what happened inside that house. But Kelly's mental state was questioned. Some believed he was unstable and had falsely confessed. Others believed the confession was real and that he had finally let the truth slip out. Even now, he remains one of the most talked about suspects in Villisca. A third name sometimes linked to the murders is William Mansfield, a man tied to other axe-related killings. His name has floated around the case for years, but direct proof connecting him to Villisca never materialized. That is the tragedy of this story. There are suspects. There are theories. There are confessions, but there is no final answer. No one was ever convicted. No one was ever officially brought to justice. And the house still stands. That is what makes Villisca so unforgettable. Not just the murder itself, but the silence afterward. A family wiped out in the dark. Children killed in their beds. A killer who seems to have known the house well enough to move through it like he belonged there. And a town left behind with nothing but grief, rumors, and 100 years of questions. Some crimes become infamous because they are loud. The Villisca Axe Murders became infamous because they were quiet. A quiet house, a quiet night, a quiet killer, and a silence that has never fully gone away. That is why people still return to this story. That is why the house still unsettles visitors. And that is why, even after more than a century, Villisca still feels like a place where something terrible happened and never really left. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more real cases, internet mysteries, and stories that only get darker the deeper you look.